Get ready, because we're going deep today
Hey.
into the book of Judges
Oh, yeah.
with the help of Estudo da Biblia, Visão Panoramica, pelo Instituto Bíblico do Brasil.
That's a mouthful.
It is.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're jumping in a time machine and landing right in the middle of ancient Israel just after Joshua passes away.
And what's waiting for us there?
Oh, just epic battles, complicated heroes, lots and lots of drama.
It's so much more than just exciting stories, though.
Really?
It is. Like, we're looking at a whole nation wrestling with their faith and their identity. You could even call it, like, a spiritual roller coaster?
Spiritual roller coaster. I like that.
Full of twists and turns.
Yeah, and I think the ride starts with a pretty steep drop right off the bat.
Oh, tell me about it.
This is a whole generation that didn't really know God the same way their parents did.
Right. The ones who walked out of Egypt, crossed the Jordan, saw all those miracles firsthand.
Yeah, they're gone.
Gone.
So what does it mean for the people left behind?
Well, they inherited this amazing land, the Promised Land.
Right.
But they didn't necessarily inherit the same depth of faith.
I see. So their foundation was a little shaky.
Exactly. And that's going to have some serious consequences.
Okay, so walk me through it. What happens next?
So this is where things get really interesting, right?
Okay.
The book of Judges, it lays out this pattern, this back and forth in the Israelites' relationship with God.
What do you mean?
Like they stray from God, things go bad, really bad.
Yep.
They cry out for help.
Mm-hmm.
God raises up a judge to deliver them.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
they do it all over again.
Exactly. Rinse and repeat.
So it's like this never-ending loop of messing up and making up with God.
In a nutshell, yes. And it really highlights something important, even for us today.
Okay.
The consequences when we stray from our faith and how important it is to stay strong.
That's deep. All right, so let's talk about these judges. Now, I'm picturing powerful warriors, leading armies, crushing their enemies. Am I on the right track?
You're getting there. Some were definitely the warrior type, no doubt.
Okay.
But some judges led during times of peace, too.
Oh, yeah.
The Estudo de Biblia actually highlights guys like Tola and Jair.
Okay.
Now, their leadership might not have been as flashy,
Right.
but they brought prosperity and stability, which is huge.
So it's not always about those big dramatic actions.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes the biggest win is just keeping the peace.
That's a good point. Okay, but come on. We all love a good action story. Tell me about some of those warrior judges, the ones who really went all out.
Oh, we've got some wild ones. First up, we've got Othniel, the OG judge.
Okay.
He kicks things off with a bang, rescues Israel from oppression.
And then?
And then there's Ehud.
Ooh, what'd he do?
Let's just say he was a lefty with a plan and a very large, very unsuspecting opponent.
I see. A man of action.
This is where all those vivid details in the text really come alive.
What do you mean?
They might seem kind of random at first, but they really give you a feel for what it was like back then.
Huh. It makes you wonder if those details were just for drama or if there's like a deeper meaning there, something symbolic.
That's not something to think about.
Right. All right. Who else is on this Judge All-Star team?
Well, we can't leave out Deborah, can we?
Deborah.
She's the only woman judge.
Oh, wow.
She was a prophetess, rallied the troops, inspired Barak to lead Israel against those Canaanites.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
A woman leading in those times? That must have been unheard of.
You said it. She even predicted how the victory would go down. Talk about confidence.
I mean, that's incredible. A woman leading, a prophetess, predicting victory. It really challenges how we think about leadership, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And her story, along with all the other judges, shows us that God can work through anyone, right? No matter their background, to make things happen.
I love that. All right, I'm ready for more. Who's next?
All right, let's talk about Gideon. Now, here's a guy who starts off full of doubt.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But God sees something in him.
I can relate to that. Having doubts, I mean...
we've all been there, right?
For sure.
Remember the story with the fleece?
Oh, yeah. Gideon testing God's will, needing that extra reassurance.
Exactly. We all need a sign sometimes. And then there's that famous battle where God purposely shrinks Gideon's army down to practically nothing.
Why would he do that?
So everyone knows, without a doubt, that the victory was God's doing, not human strengths.
Wow, that's powerful. Okay, who else is there?
Well, there's Jephthah, a real warrior, but also known for making a tragic vow.
What kind of vow?
One that people have been debating for centuries.
Yeah.
Did he actually sacrifice his own daughter?
Oh, my God.
Or was she dedicated to a life of service to God? The Estudo de Biblia really digs into those different interpretations, makes us wrestle with tough questions about faith and sacrifice.
Man, those are some heavy questions. It's amazing how these stories from so long ago can still make us think so deeply about things that are still relevant today.
Absolutely.
It's not just about learning historical facts. It's about understanding ourselves, the choices we make, and how complicated faith can be.
You got it. Okay, ready for another judge?
Hit me.
Let's talk about Samson. Charisma, strength, you name it, he had it all. But he had a weakness for Philistine women, and it ultimately led to his downfall.
That's the classic hero story, isn't it? All that power, but one fatal flaw.
Classic for a reason. But even in his failures, we see God working.
It's a point.
Samson's story, like so many in Judges, is a mix of victories and defeats, reminding us that even when we mess up, God can still use our lives for something bigger. It really makes you think, even the strongest people can have weaknesses.
Yeah, for sure. But before we move on, I want to circle back to those cycles you mentioned earlier.
Oh, right, the whole messing up and making up with God thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How does that play into the bigger story of the Judges?
Well, when you look closely, you can see this gradual decline,
A decline in what?
in their morals, in their faith. Like, each time they go through the cycle, things get a little worse, a little more chaotic.
So it's not just about individual mistakes. It's about the impact those choices have on everyone else.
You got it. And that leads us to one of the most interesting and honestly kind of disturbing stories in Judges.
Okay, which one?
The story of Micah, the Levite, and the Danites. It really shows us how messed up things were, both spiritually and morally.
Okay, I'm going to need a refresher here. Who are these guys and what exactly happened?
All right, so Micah, he's a guy who, well, he had a unique approach to religion.
What do you mean?
He made idols.
He made idols. Wait, isn't that like the opposite of what they were supposed to be doing?
You'd think, right? But the Estudio de Biblia points out something interesting.
Okay, what's that?
The whole story actually starts with him confessing something.
Confessing what?
He stole a bunch of silver from his mom.
Oh, no.
And after she cursed whoever took it, well, he panicked and admitted to it.
So he was more scared of his mom's curse than, like, divine punishment. That's something else.
It really shows you how twisted their priorities were.
Yeah, I can see that. So what happens next?
Well, he returns the silver, of course, and his mom, feeling all relieved, decides to use some of it to make an idol for their house.
Wait, what? She made an idol?
Yep, an idol for their home.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's like they were trying to find some loophole in their faith.
Right. We'll worship Yahweh, but we'll have this little idol on the side just in case.
Hedging their bets.
Exactly. It's a great example of the syncretism that was happening back then.
Syncretism, that's a big word.
It just means they were blending different beliefs and practices together.
Oh, okay. So they're mixing their old ways with their new faith.
Basically, they wanted to have the best of both worlds without fully committing to either.
So where does the Levite come in?
Well, remember, the Levites were the priests, right?
Right, they were the ones who served in the tabernacle and later the temple.
Exactly. But this Levite, he was kind of a wanderer looking for work.
Okay.
And he comes across Micah and his little idol shrine.
What a coincidence.
Micah sees this as his chance to make his whole operation seem more legit.
Right, having an actual priest there would make people take it more seriously.
Exactly. And the Levite, well, he needed a job, a place to stay, so he agreed to it.
It makes you wonder about those in positions of religious authority, even back then.
What do you mean?
Were they truly devoted to God, or were they just looking for an easy way to make a living?
That's a question that's still relevant today, isn't it? So, to finish off this strange little story, we need to bring in the Danites.
Okay, who are they?
They were still searching for their own land, so they sent out scouts to find a suitable spot.
Okay.
And guess what? These scouts stumble upon Micah, the Levite, and the whole idol setup.
Oh, this can't be good.
And instead of seeing it for what it was, a total distortion of their faith,
Yeah.
they decided to steal it all.
They stole the idol.
The idol, the priestly clothes, even the Levite himself. They basically kidnapped him to be their own personal priest.
Wow, that's wild. It's
Yeah.
like they were shopping for a god that fit their needs.
Exactly. It shows just how far they'd fallen. Everyone was making up their own rules, picking and choosing which parts of their faith they wanted to follow.
It's a far cry from the unity and devotion they had when they left Egypt.
You said it. And this whole episode, it's just a taste of what's to come. Remember that downward spiral we talked about?
Oh, this doesn't sound good.
It's about to get even darker. Let's dive into one of the most disturbing stories in Judges. The story of the Levite and his concubine.
Okay, before we do, can we define what a concubine was back then? I have a feeling it wasn't quite the same as a wife.
You're right. It was all about legal status and family involvement. A concubine didn't have the same rights or protection as a wife.
Okay, that's important context. So what happened in this story?
So this Levite and his concubine, they're traveling, and they stop in a Benjaminite town called Gibeah for the night.
Okay.
An older man offers them hospitality, a place to stay. Seems safe enough, right?
Yeah, so far so good.
But then a group of wicked men surround the house.
Oh, no.
They demand that the Levite be brought out so they can, well, let's just say their intentions were evil.
That's horrible. It's a reminder of what happens when a society loses its moral compass. Violence and lawlessness take over.
And what's even more disturbing is the homeowner's response.
What did he do?
Instead of protecting his guests, he offers his own daughter and the Levite's concubine to the mob.
He offered his own daughter? Are you serious?
He was willing to sacrifice these women to save himself.
That's just unbelievable. It shows how fear can make people do the most unthinkable things.
Exactly. It's a chilling example. So tragically, the concubine, she's abused all night long and found dead in the morning.
Oh my gosh, that's just awful.
The Levite, consumed by grief and rage, does something shocking.
What did he do?
He takes her body, cuts it into pieces, and sends those pieces to all the tribes of Israel.
Wow, that's intense. I can't even imagine the pain he must have been feeling.
It was a horrific act, but it was also a way to get people's attention.
What do you mean?
He wanted to force the other tribes to see the gravity of the crime and demand justice.
And did it work?
It did. The other tribes were horrified by what had happened and gathered to confront the Benjaminites.
Did they hand over the men who did it?
Nope. The Benjaminites refused. They chose to protect their own, even though what they did was clearly wrong.
So this went from a local crime to a full-blown war between the tribes.
Exactly. And the Estudio de Biblia points out something really interesting.
What's that?
The Israelites actually lost their first 3 battles against the Benjaminites.
Really? But didn't they consult God before going to war?
They did. And God told them to go to war.
So how did they lose?
The Estudio de Biblia suggests that they lost because of their pride. They underestimated the Benjaminites and relied on their own strength instead of fully trusting God.
So it wasn't enough to be on the right side. They had to approach it with the right attitude.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even when we think we're doing the right thing, our motivations matter.
Okay, so what happened in the end?
They eventually won, but it came at a terrible cost. Almost the entire tribe of Benjamin was wiped out, and the other tribes were left dealing with the aftermath of this awful conflict.
That's a bleak ending to an already tragic story. But I feel like there's a bigger message here, something beyond just the events themselves.
You're right, the book of Judges doesn't end there. It ends with this simple but powerful statement. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
So basically, because there was no king, no central authority to guide them and enforce God's law, everything fell apart.
Exactly. It's both an explanation and a warning. It explains why things got so bad, but it also warns against the dangers of moral relativism.
What's moral relativism?
It's the idea that there's no absolute right or wrong. Everyone can decide for themselves what's right.
That's scary, and it kind of feels relevant today, you know?
It does, doesn't it?
With everyone having their own truth and all.
It's a powerful reminder that we need something more, some kind of moral compass that goes beyond our own opinions.
And this sets the stage for what comes next, right?
Exactly. The rise of kingship in Israel.
So all this chaos and drama during the time of the judges, it was leading to a new chapter in Israel's story.
Exactly. It showed them that they needed a leader, someone to bring them back to God and restore order and justice. But we'll save that discussion for the next part of our deep dive.
That idea of everyone doing what they thought was right, it's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is. It shows what can happen when a whole society loses its way, when there's no moral compass to guide them.
Yeah, and the consequences, they were pretty bad. But hey, I wanted to ask you about those minor judges, the Estudio de Biblia mentions.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about the big names, Deborah, Samson, all those guys. But what about these less famous judges?
They don't always get the spotlight, that's for sure. But their stories are important, too.
How so?
They help us understand the whole picture, the whole story of the book of Judges.
Okay, give me an example.
Take Tola, for instance. He was a judge for 23 years.
23 years.
Yeah.
That's longer than most of the other judges.
Exactly. It was a long time. And the interesting thing is
Right.
that the text doesn't give us a lot of details about his time as judge, no big battles or dramatic events.
What does that tell us?
It tells us that his rule was probably pretty peaceful, a time of stability, which is a big deal considering all the chaos that was going on around them.
So sometimes the greatest victory is just keeping things calm and preventing things from falling apart.
Exactly. Sometimes it's the quiet ones who make the biggest difference. And then there's Jair.
Care.
He judged Israel for 22 years.
Another long one.
And the Estudio de Biblia points out this little detail about his sons.
Okay, what about them?
They rode on 30 donkeys.
30 donkeys. That seems kind of random.
It might seem that way, but remember, back then, donkeys were a symbol of peace and prosperity.
Oh, I see. So it's like a subtle way of saying that Jair's time as judge was a good one, a time of abundance for the Israelites.
Exactly. It's amazing how these little details can reveal so much.
Yeah, it's like a little puzzle waiting to be solved.
Exactly. And these minor judges, they might not have the most exciting stories.
Right.
But they give us a glimpse into everyday life back then. They remind us that history isn't just about wars and kings. It's also about how ordinary people lived.
That's a good point. And speaking of everyday life, the Estudio de Biblia also talks about some of the cultural and religious practices from that time.
Oh, yeah, some pretty interesting ones.
Can you give us some examples?
One that really stands out is how common household idols were. Remember that story about Micah?
Oh, yeah. He made an idol for his house.
It shows how ingrained idolatry was in their culture. Even for people who said they followed Yahweh, they would try to mix their old beliefs with their new faith, creating this weird kind of spiritual blend.
It's like they wanted to play it safe, cover all their bases.
Exactly. They weren't ready to fully let go of their past, so they tried to combine it with their worship of Yahweh.
And that caused problems, right?
It definitely created some tension. It shows this constant struggle the Israelites had with fully embracing their covenant with God and letting go of their pagan roots. It's something you see throughout the Old Testament, this battle between faith and idolatry.
It's a good reminder that faith isn't always easy. It's a journey with ups and downs, doubts and questions.
Absolutely. And the book of Judges, with all its twists and turns, it gives us a pretty honest look at that journey.
So as we wrap things up here, what are some of the key takeaways from this book? What makes it relevant for us today?
Well, on the surface, it's a history book, right? It gives us a peek into ancient Israel. But it's also so much more than that.
Like what?
It's about human nature, the consequences of our choices, the battle between good and evil that's always going on, both inside us and in the world around us.
We see that over and over again, right?
Yeah.
The cycle of turning away from God, messing up, then coming back to him for help. It's like a warning about taking things for granted, forgetting where our true strength comes from.
Exactly. And even when things get really bad, when it seems like all hope is lost, God's mercy is still there for those who genuinely seek him.
That's a comforting thought.
It is. The judges, even with all their flaws, they were tools in God's plan. They rescued his people, brought them back to him, reminded them of the covenant he made with them.
It's a message of hope, isn't it? That no matter how far we stray, we can always come back.
Always. And the book of Judges, even though it's an ancient text, it speaks to us today.
How so?
It challenges us to look at our own hearts, to face our own weaknesses, to stop relying on ourselves so much and build a stronger relationship with God.
So it's not just a history lesson, it's a guide for living our lives today.
That's a great way to put it. And as we try to figure out this crazy world we live in, the book of Judges reminds us that our choices matter. What we do, what we decide, it all has consequences.
That's something worth thinking about. What kind of world are we creating for ourselves and the people who come after us? That's a great question to leave our listeners with. The book of Judges, it might be old, but it's still speaking to us today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you something to think about and maybe even inspired you to live a life that honors God and makes a difference in the world.